Welcome to the Everyday Sens podcast. This is episode 52. I'm Jack Richardson, joined as always by Brendan Parks. We are back. And I think a few things happened. Well, we missed about a week here for the Everyday Sens podcast. So, Brendan, how are you doing? How was your week, your weekend? A lot happening in Sensland, which we will obviously get into.
Yeah, it was good. I think this is a little break we've got here. So they played on Saturday and now they're off till Thursday. I don't know what on earth is going on. They got this random bye week, like, and not even a month into the season. So not a fan of that. But I will say it's refreshing that they actually won because they were on a 3-game skid. Obviously, they beat Pittsburgh 5-2 on Saturday. If they would have lost that game and gone into this little bye week 3-5, woof, it would have been just a dangerous place to be a Sens fan, especially on social media. So at least they won that game, looked really good. Now we can all kind of take a breather and relax because it was getting pretty negative there, myself included. Just that was a crazy bad streak. So, anyways, 4-4 here, 8 games into the season. Now we missed a lot of stuff because, of course, the 4 days that you were gone, somehow everything rains down with like 6 different pieces of news, and honestly, I thought there was going to be a few more announcements too, but thankfully there wasn't. But we're going to get into it all today. No big deal. I mean, we can kind of just sum it up in one episode anyway, which is nice because everybody can listen and we can get the whole recap and our thoughts. So we can dive right in here because we've got like a ton of different news pieces. It's not just going to be opinions and stuff today. It's actual things that have been released. And I think we're expecting a couple more things in the coming days as well.
Yeah, it was crazy. So on Thursday, I was driving to to London, excuse me, to London, Ontario. I was visiting some friends. I went to school there. And it was a good time. It was good to be away. And the plan was for me to just kind of unplug, like I was still gonna watch the games maybe and tweet obviously, but just, like get away from stuff. Um, and I'm not kidding. I was still on the 416 on the way down to the 401. And I'm getting a bunch of texts from my friends. Like I've got the Apple CarPlay thing. So all they're popping up and I'm like, what's going on? This is a little weird. One of them was, well, that was out of the blue with Pinto. And I'm thinking he signed. I thought he signed his deal. Um, or they made a trade. And then I get one of them to call me and they told me he's been suspended for gambling. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So obviously things broke down. Obviously, we figured everything out after mostly. But yeah, this is crazy. Like when the Sens are making international headlines and news, when he's the or part of the lead story for national news, it's a big deal. Like this isn't just a trade or a signing. This is kind of a unprecedented scenario. So yeah, we got to talk about it. This is easily the first thing we got to talk about. Still, even a few days later, Shane Pinto suspended for 41 games for activity related to sports wagering. As the news broke, more came out about it a little bit. It just sounds like it was a scenario where he was allowing friends, maybe other people. I don't want to say they were friends, but just other people to use his account under his name, which they're illegally allowed to have. This is just like there's so many things to unpack here. So I want to get your initial thoughts. Just like where do you stand? Like, I know there's been a lot of stuff in the sense of, Pinto. Is this like a mistake? Did he just get caught, or did he literally just make a mistake in that, like, this isn't something he knew he was doing wrong? NHLPA was involved in the suspension. It was a settlement. So yeah, there's a lot. Like, just what were your thoughts? So we've had some time here to digest this, but not on my bingo card. I'll put it like that.
Yeah, it was terribly surprising. I mean, I also saw that Pinto popped up on my news feed, and I was like, okay, he must have signed or something must have happened. This was the last thing anybody expected, and I think from what they said too, like the team found out about this maybe a few weeks ago. Like they actually did offer Pinto a couple of contracts. It wasn't like they knew about this from early in the summer. Like this was a fairly new thing, and then they rescinded their offers. So I mean, I don't even know what to think about it, honestly. To me, like I've hardly even tweeted about it or anything because like it's so bizarre. Like we don't know the details, so it's really hard to speculate, right? I mean, he becomes the first player in NHL history to get suspended for this, which I mean, I guess hey, the Sens are getting some attention, but like NFL players, I know it's been happening a lot. Jameson Williams on the Lions was a big one. He was a first round pick a couple of years ago. Got suspended for half a season or a full season for gambling, and that's been happening more and more. Again, notably, like Pinto did not bet on NHL games before people get ahead of themselves here and we start getting blasted as Sens fans for Shane Pinto. Like it sounds like what you said with the friends, or maybe he was like betting at a facility on a different sport. Like you can't bet, like you couldn't bet at the Sensplex on football or something that's not allowed. So maybe something like that was happening. Regardless of what it was, like I don't really even care that much. I mean, Pinto apologized and he took ownership, which makes you think he probably was somewhat aware of the rules, or maybe he found out and he kind of was a little deceptive, or who knows, right? Like he's still 22 years old. Um, and he obviously made a mistake. I mean, I'm not saying he shouldn't be punished for this. But at the same time, until we actually know, and I don't know if we ever will, but what happened, I mean, it's hard to say Shane Pinto's in the wrong here and that he's at fault and he's being selfish. Like, no, I'm not going to say that. And frankly, I mean, right on his helmet last year for the whole season was like bet 99. So, I mean, that's not a great endorsement of, if you're going to endorse betting so heavily, and then you're going to have like Austin Matthews and all these commercials, and you're going to have all the players, and then you're going to suspend players for betting on different sports. And I don't know. It's just kind of a convoluted mess that I find kind of frustrating. But regardless, we can talk a little bit about Pinto missing and kind of what that's going to mean, because obviously they started the year, they're 4-4 without him. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me, and you asked this question as one of your questions of the day recently, was, who's impressed you the most? I think Ridley Gregg is at the top of that list. And Ridley Gregg is kind of making us forget about Shane Pinto a little bit because he's been so good. Like he's been better than Pinto was last year in that like second line center role, and now kind of middle six with Norris returning. But obviously small sample size, but Gregg's been, I think, one of their best, if not their best player this year. So it's kind of that's lucky for Ottawa in a way, because if Gregg didn't step up and he was kind of back to being like an AHL player, I don't know what they would do. Like they'd have to hope Norris stayed healthy. They'd have Chartier playing on maybe the third line. It's like that's just not sustainable, right? So really, Greg stepping up is kind of helping forget about Pinto a little bit. I'm just hoping he can kind of sustain this. I know too, like this is 41 games from the start of the season, so it's not from like when he got suspended. It's actually from game one. He can come back on January 24th, I want to say, against Philadelphia. Which all things considered, like I mean, they should be in a fine spot. Like I'm not really concerned that he's going to be missing for that long. He can come back for the second half of the year and hopefully be fresh, ready to go, healthy. But regardless, like it's still unfortunate because he's a good player. But now, I mean, they don't have to worry about signing him, I guess, and they can kind of focus on just getting that out of the way, because I'm sure Pierre Dorion started to feel the heat about that, and that was something creeping up. So now we can kind of focus on more of the positives. Just put this to the side. I want to hear your thoughts on the whole thing, because it is really just a mess. And we don't know the details, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me for the league to be endorsing gambling like they are and then suspending players for gambling on a different sport. Like it's just weird. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and again, we also don't know that he was just it was on other sports. Like it could have like from what I read and what I've seen in the reports, it's been a big flurry. But Pierre LeBrun was on with a O'Brien Haley. He was on overdrive with TSN the day it happened, I think. And he talked about the league and the advertising and how murky it can be. And they were, but by I'm just going off of his tone because there's going to be details that aren't reported, I think, by people for various reasons, and that might be frustrating, but I get it. Um, I get the sense that it was just a bit of a technicality, I think. And there's a reason that he didn't push back on the 41 games. Like that's important too, right? He didn't. There's no appeal happening. It was a settlement, so it could have been worse. It's I think it's murky, and I know there's also speculation that maybe he was giving information about injuries, so not directly betting on NHL games himself, but saying, "Hey, man, Brady's injured tonight, so he's not getting this many shots." So the timeline's important because the investigation began in the summer. The Sens were not made aware of it, like you mentioned, until before training camp. So right before training camp. Um, and the day exactly is up in the air, but all summer, like, and because the reason that the timeline's important is because people are saying, "Oh, is that why they signed Tarasenko and didn't leave room for him?" It's not. It's not. And I think we got to make it clear here, and we'll get into Dorion a little bit more on the next segment. But like the Sens kind of got lucky. So basically, any criticism for Dorion from training camp on being like, you got to make a trade, just bite the bullet. Obviously, makes sense now why he wasn't. But in the summer, I mean, we can give him credit, but also not because he got lucky. Like easily could have made a trade with Matthew Joseph in the
Could you
summer.
imagine?
Imagine.
Oh
Can
my
you
god.
imagine? Oh, I mean, and we'll get into it because Dorion is a big topic of conversation this weekend as well for various reasons. But this would have been an absolute disaster. And it's not great, still not a good thing for the Sens or for Pinto, but I think the disaster was avoided mostly. Like you mentioned, I think we're in a good spot. I think when they were losing those games, people are saying, and they don't have Pinto signed. They don't, like, why isn't Pinto signed? I didn't really buy that as much because I know he's a valuable player, but I was still looking at their lineup saying they're totally fine. Ridley Gregg's been outstanding. Norris is back. Like I didn't really buy they got to sign Pinto. Like Pinto's value is going up because they keep losing without him. So I agree with you in the sense that the 41 games to me isn't. It's not even like, damn, we're losing this guy for 41 games. It's kind of weird, right? Because such a unique scenario. Like his contract negotiation has almost nothing to do with the 41 games, but it's also two separate stories. It's crazy. That's why what I meant when I said it wasn't on my bingo card. But I'm gonna read the statement and then we can just kind of touch on the statement because I think the wording is really weird. Um, and very small. So from the National Hockey League on Thursday, this is what they said. The National Hockey League announced today that it has suspended NHL player Shane Pinto for 41 games for activities relating to sports wagering. The league's investigation found no evidence that Pinto made any wagers on NHL games. The NHL considers this matter closed, absent the emergence of new information, and will have no further comment. So for after that, I was pulling over at en routes just throughout the day, going on my phone to try and figure out what was going on. Still, there was new stuff. The CBA says players are allowed to bet on other sports. Like you mentioned, though, it can't be at team facilities, blah, blah, blah. So, and Friedman's mentioned this, like all the insiders have said this, that you're allowed to have your own account. And especially now with the legality of it or legalization of it in Ontario, especially like the ads, like the constant barrage of it, like it's everywhere for these guys. So I really, I if this is a scenario where Pinto has a gambling addiction or something like that's a whole other thing that we haven't even really thought about, right? It's just more been a like, oh, he got caught and made a stupid mistake, but like that's something we got to consider too. So I personally just hope that it forces the NHL to kind of change the rules a little bit, because I understand how dicey it is with integrity of their sport and like if they can pro games or whatever. That's a murky situation to be in, but it seems like, and it could be wrong, but it feels like to me they didn't do a ton of homework on what the impact would be for the players when they thought about the revenue, because it brings in so much revenue for everyone involved, like the broadcast, especially like even like the ads. So it's such a murky situation, and like I don't know, man. I like do you think I know that there were some comments about Pinto as a player, as a person, like, where do you sit on all of that? Because it's a tough, line to walk when all the information isn't public, but to me, I found it ridiculous.
Well, yeah, anybody attacking Pinto's character for whatever this was is completely like insane. I mean, I'm sorry, but again, we don't know the details. I just want to emphasize that. But like, regardless of if he was betting on different sports or if he was providing info, like I don't even really care. Like again, he's 22 years old, and like I can tell you as someone who's bet before, like betting is it's a weird thing, man. Like it's a weird thing. It really draws you in, and I mean, again, he's a professional sports player, sure, but like he's still a person at the end of the day, right? Like Shane Pinto's you can hear this guy talk and he's just like any of us, just he makes a ton of money playing sports. So it's not like he has some different mentality here. He still falls into the same things with betting and stuff like that. So yeah, attacking his character and speaking about that at all is just like crazy. You shouldn't be doing that. Um, one thing I will say about this whole betting thing is I bet you he's not going to be the last. I think this is going to be happening more and more. Obviously, the first in NHL history, sure, but you're seeing it in other sports how they're really stepping up. I think that there's going to be more of this come out because again, Pinto might have got caught, but I can guarantee he's not the only player who's done anything like this. I'm sure there have been more than a few, like a lot more than a few players who could have been suspended if they were caught for something. It just so happens that he ended up getting caught for whatever this was. So yes, if he was being deceptive or something, people can say, oh, well, that's, they can try and attack his character, but whatever, forget about that. Because frankly, Shane Pinto, you can talk to this guy and you can see him talk, and you know he's a good person, and he's not. This is no like manipulative, like deceiving kind of like evil thing he's doing. It's really not that deep. So I think we kind of just need to move on from it, just because like he's gonna get his 41 games. I'm sure he's gonna learn from it, as he said in his apologetic kind of quote. But otherwise, there's not any reason to attack him here. Just stand behind him. I mean, the Sens released a good statement too, saying that they were behind him and they were gonna embrace his return and everything and help him get back to it. So that's really all we can do. And yeah, I'm good for it. I just think this is going to be the first of many kind of balls to drop in the NHL because yeah, the NFL's really been heavy on it. One interesting thing that I think it was Ian Mendez who said it was if they would have caught Pinto betting on like NHL games. Apparently, like they might have banned him from the league forever. Like they might have
Yeah.
just literally dropped the hammer and kicked him out of the league at 22 years old, which is I don't know how I feel about that. That's like I know betting on NHL games is different, especially if it was his own games. But like I know NFL players did bet on the NFL. Like Calvin Ridley got suspended a full year for betting on NFL games, and he's an NFL wide receiver. It wasn't
Mhm.
his games, I don't think. But like it was a big meme because he was like putting parlays in on like other NFL games and stuff. Like if Pinto was betting on NHL games and getting suspended for the rest of his career, like holy, that's crazy. Because I bet you some players have done that as well.
Well, and that's the thing. So I was watching the Chargers and Bears last night for football, and they were talking earlier in the game about Austin Eckler, the running back for the Chargers, and saying that he I think he streams on and plays video games
I
and stuff
heard
like a
that.
lot of them do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. He's fun, but I guess he was talking about how he's on his own fantasy team and he's in a bunch of fantasy leagues. I have EDN on my fantasy roster as well, and he's got himself or something. He played himself one week in fantasy, and he they put out tweets. But Eckler, and this is related to what I'm going to talk about with Pinto, but like Eckler apparently said, I guess, and the broadcast was talking about it that he knew that he wasn't living up to his hype for fantasy, so he's going to try harder or something like that. How is that not backwards? Like if imagine if you were, and I know they're not for money and they investigate it and it's not for money for the NFL players, but like I'm in a fantasy league and there's no money on it. If I was myself on one of my teams where I was playing myself and I wanted to win, I mean like it's easy to question why that would be a bit of a breach of confidence. So that's different. The NFL is a whole different beast, but a lot of leagues copy what they do, and I think the NHL is kind of doing that as well. But um, in terms of Shane Pinto, I think we kind of missed a few other details as well. In that it's excuse me, seems like it was a third party was involved in a way, right? And I think that needs to be kind of cleared up because is it a bookie? It doesn't sound like it. What it sounds like is Pinto has an account with one of the sports books for that are sponsored by the NHL or in partners with the NHL. Let's just say it's DraftKings for the purpose of the argument. I'm guessing that's probably a good guess, but um so he's got a DraftKings account and they notice thousands of dollars being put on, and I'm purely speculating, but just for the example, they notice from Shane Pinto's account $10,000 for the Sens to make the playoffs next season. That's why the investigation started this summer. And the reason I'm saying that as an example is because DraftKings themselves is the one that alerted the NHL. The sports books like said they flagged it being like this is kind of weird. This is like they know who it is. And for those who haven't signed up for any betting sites or anything like that, I think it's important to know you use your identification. You have to specify what your work is, like what line of work you're in. So they know who you are and what you do. So if you're Shane Pinto and you say I'm an NHL player, and then you put a $10,000 bet on the Sens to make the playoffs, again speculation. I'm just saying they would be like, "What's going on here?" They'd flag it. Given that there was an investigation, I think what happened is his friend used his account and did it. That's my guess. But in that, if that's the case, it's legitimately just a mistake. It's a stupid mistake, but it's a mistake. So I think that's what happened. I don't. It's careful wording from myself and from the NHL because I do not want to speculate. It could be much worse than we think. He could be getting lucky with the 41 gamer, but nonetheless, that turned some heads around the NHL. And I think that's all we can honestly say on it. But if you want to talk about gambling a little bit more too, because we can open that can of worms. Like we're a podcast. A lot of podcasts are sponsored by sports books and talk about it and stuff like that. I've even mentioned that I'm keeping track of the Sens odds throughout the year, seeing how they do and when they're favored, when they're not favored. Like it's part of sports now, whether you like it or not. And you know, we can have moral objections to the way it's advertised and stuff like that, but whether you like it or not, that's the way sports is now, is the revenue that it brings in for the big companies. Like if you and I had an opportunity to be sponsored by one, I think we would be pretty dumb not to take it because it's a sponsorship. Like that's just I think and I don't even know if I have a question, but it's just it's it needs to be tweaked, I think, because like you mentioned, the Sens helmet ad for the past 2 seasons at home has been a sports book, and then they're handing out this 41 game national headline story that Shane Pinto, a player wearing it, has been suspended for gambling. Like that's a little strange to me. So I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't like, but it's just it feels like a little bit of a I don't want to say a double standard, but maybe that is the right way to say it.
I just think they need like a system in place or some sort of like supportive thing in place to kind of monitor and make players aware of all of the rules. I know that they did release I saw they released like the most obvious things ever. Like they put a list of things for the players after this happened, because I think the league even admitted, and I think Friedman and some of the other guys said, like a lot of the players weren't aware of some of the technicalities and the rules that were kind of underlying that were hidden in the fine text, and so they actually released like a list of different rules, and I don't have it up, but that was just like to the players and what they told the players so that they know moving forward, like they're not allowed to do certain things. So it makes me wonder like how much the players actually knew they were and weren't allowed to do with gambling. Because again, they don't, like, it's not that they can't gamble on anything ever. Like that's not what's off limits here. It's just that there's technicalities in like the bold text that you can't violate, and I don't think the players were aware of a lot of those. So I do wonder if maybe Pinto just wasn't aware of something, or if it was just a stupid mistake. But yeah, like gambling, I just think they need to have something in place here. To make the players aware and to kind of support them, because it is a dangerous thing. Like gambling's fun, it's great to win and stuff, but when you're losing, like especially for players, like that can lead to a pretty bad path. I mean, it's a dangerous thing for sure, which is why a lot of people don't like it, because they really are shoving it down our throats nowadays with how much gambling is sponsored, especially by the big leagues and corporations. So I just think they need to have something in place to prevent things from happening, because they are going to happen. But yeah, I'm happy that they kind of. It sucks that it has to be Pinto, but like somebody was going to break this kind of like line that was sitting here of gambling and then getting in trouble for it in the NHL, because it's happened other places. Sucks that it had to be Pinto, but I think that now the rules are going to be more clear to the players. They're going to know and hopefully smarten up a little bit and not make any silly mistakes moving forward, because it would be unfortunate to see some of the stars in the league getting suspended. And yeah, it does look stupid on the league too when they're advertising gambling with literally some of their biggest stars being in the commercials, and then they're suspending people for gambling related activities. It's just really bizarre and strange and kind of a bad outlook and perspective on things. So yeah, do you have anything else on Pinto, or you're feeling good about this?
Not
Not
really.
good, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, not really. It's a wild story in the sense that it felt like it came out of nowhere. And I'm sure the Sens felt the same way in training camp. I don't think it didn't seem like they were hiding anything when they talked about it about the contract negotiation with Pinto. It just felt like it was a stalled negotiation. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. Obviously, we'll circle back in January. I'm sure that'll be the next time we hear anything about it. It's at the surface level, it's a blessing in disguise for the Sens because we don't have a cap issue now for 41 games. Obviously, Chabot, we'll talk about Thomas Chabot in a little bit too, but that LTIR, first time they've ever used LTIR, I think. Fun fact, or second time, whatever it is. So we'll get into all of that, but let's get into a thing that kind of was drummed up again on Saturday night in the headlines section. But I'm going to credit Leames Martian for this one as well. The streets had it first for Martian there, but Sens are going to be punished for the Evgenii Dadonov trade, expecting that at some time this week. It might have actually already happened today. Like, I don't know when it's going to be, but take people back in time here. The Ottawa Senators signed Evgenii Dadonov to a 3-year contract in December of 2020 when free agency opened for the COVID weird period. He played 1 year in Ottawa, the shortened COVID 2021 season, Canadian division. Fairly disappointing. Wasn't really a great first season for Dadonov. That summer, the Sens traded him to Vegas for Nick Holden and I think a draft pick, but that was the deal. It was Nick Holden for Evgeny Dadonov. Um, that deadline, or was it last year's deadline? I think it was that deadline. So the 2022 trade deadline, the Vegas Golden Knights tried to move Dadonov to the Anaheim Ducks, but he waived it because of a no, like they put the trade through, but then it was voided because Dadonov has a 10-team no trade clause. The reason when the Sens signed him is important is because Pierre Dorion signed this contract. This wasn't a scenario where the Sens picked up Dadonov on waivers or traded for him. They signed it. Pierre Dorion signed off on the deal, very legally binding, and then moved him to Vegas, seemingly either lying or leading on that or leading Vegas to believe the 10-team no trade thing was no longer in play. So I think when that happened and it all broke, there was a report that it was going to be put to bed. Sens will not face punishment. But now we're hearing different things, and Friedman said that it will come this week. What do you make of this? And we'll get into certain punishments, whether it's warranted or not. But when it rains, it pours.
well, yeah, I think this is kind of just another Pierre Dorion blunder in the grand scheme of things. And I know that people kind of aren't entirely blaming Ottawa. Some people are kind of trying to rebuttal, but like, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, this was just kind of a Bush League thing that shouldn't have happened. What I will say, though, is that like, it's been 2 years, more than 2 years since this happened now. Like, why are we being punished right now? Like, why is the punishment taking this long? There's no way that this should have taken until this season when the Sens are actually trying to be competitive and, like, things are going right for them, new ownership is in, and now they're gonna get punished for something that happened 2, 3 years ago now that's just bringing up, like, old scars. I mean, if they would have punished us at the time, I would understand, but, like, why wait this long? It just doesn't really make sense to me on the timeline. One thing I will say, like, I know I was reading this morning a little bit about it, and Friedman put out that again, yeah, he thinks the Sens are going to be punished, probably maybe today. But he put that because of new ownership, the punishment's probably going to be less, which is very interesting to me because obviously Melnick was in there previously. Now Anlauer comes in, it's a different regime. Pierre Dorion is still here, so I mean, if it is his blunder, then like it's kind of hard to punish them less. But again, I would be surprised if it's a first round pick because that was the initial rumor from Martian was that he was hearing a first round pick was going to be taken, which would probably be their own, which would leave them with one, which is Detroit's that they got from that trade with DeBrincat, which that would be awful. Like losing a first round pick. And again, hopefully Ottawa's first round pick won't be super high this year, but at the same time, like a first round pick in itself is valuable. Like that's a deadline piece. That's something that can be used. For more than just drafting a quality prospect. So losing that over something that happened 2, 3 years ago is like, and it was a dumb mistake. That would be brutal. Like that would be a fireable offense in my opinion in itself. And that was also why Martian had a rumor too that he was hearing that Dorion was going to be out the door. And we're going to talk about Pierre, I think, a little bit more here. But um, I mean, I think that's kind of what led to it. It's like if this whole thing ends up with the Sens losing a first round pick, how do you not fire Pierre Dorion? Like he's already on thin ice, and then this happens. I mean, come on. But again, like I said, I don't agree with the fact that it would be a first round pick. And Freeman said he'd be surprised if it was. If we lose like a third or fourth round pick or something, whatever. Like, I mean, that still sucks. You shouldn't be losing anything for this. But I'll like, who really cares at the end of the day? Like, let's just accept our fate there. My biggest thing is the timeline. And I think it's like there has to be accountability for Pierre Dorion, absolutely. But at the same time, I don't understand like why we're getting punished 2, 3 years later after this happened. Um, Thankfully, and Lauer being here should buy us a little bit of respect from the league, and hopefully they won't punish us too hard. But what are your thoughts on it? Because it's just weird timing, and it's especially weird timing that this came out right after the Pinto thing. Like it's just literally like when it rains, it pours. That's a great kind of thing to say because it is wild, and then that was all amidst a 3 game losing streak too. That was extremely frustrating. So it's just a terrible week for the Sens.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that game in a little bit because we want to talk about Eric Branstrom and like there's so much to get into on the ice too. But yeah, the thing I think I like that you brought up the timeline because yeah, it makes no sense, especially that it was ruled that there wasn't going to be anything. The reason I think it's being drummed up again is, or I'm guessing anyway, is that there was maybe some leading on from Dorion and the Sens as to and it wasn't just a mistake, right? Because if they just forgotten about it and it was like, that's our bad, sorry, it's like, okay, but maybe more details came out, maybe a certain, oh, this is, I just thought about this, very hard speculation on my part. And again, I want to emphasize speculate, put the filter over a speculation filter, like a tinfoil hat. Trent Mann's departure from the Sens as assistant GM. He wasn't an assistant GM at the time. The Mann brothers leaving is also being investigated. That's also something that will be coming up eventually against the Sens management or regime. Maybe Trent Mann's departure drummed up more investigation about it. Trent blew a whistle and was like, "Hey, this is happening." I don't know. Like, there's so much stuff because I'm speculating on that because there's no other reason, like you said, for this to come up. Vegas is fine. They won the cup last year. Like they literally did quite all right for themselves, even though they couldn't trade Dadonov when they wanted to. So that to me makes it just feel a little bit um backwards in the sense, like that doesn't make sense. Another part of it when you said it was rumored maybe a first round pick. Now Friedman's not so sure. Um, that's a whole other can of worms. I know everyone, and I don't disagree uh, with this, but everyone is immediately pointing to Chicago and saying, "Why weren't the Blackhawks punished for sexual assault?" Like people are saying they got Bedard and we're getting a first round pick. I think that's a little bit ridiculous to compare. Only in the sense that yeah, it's crazy that Chicago didn't really face any actual punishment for that, but it's different. It's different, and I think if you're saying it's not different, same league, whatever, then we're just not going to see eye to eye on that to me. Like because it there are reasons that you can point out to the league and be like, this is ridiculous. The Sens are getting fined for this when it was publicly available information. Like a penalty at all is crazy, right? When you can look up on Cap Friendly 10 team no trade. Um, the thing that like I'm spiraling about this was actually bigger news to me than the Pinto thing, just because it's more real. It's going to have real implications for the Sens, whatever it is. And quite honestly, could and should be the final straw for Pierre Dorion as GM of this team. But I want to get into that in a little bit. But with this scenario, it's like maybe Dorion gave the wrong 10 team list and what didn't have Anaheim on. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there that could have been a miscommunicated part. So the thing I brought up on Twitter was the Arizona Coyotes being fined a first and second round pick. They lost their 2021 first round pick because of working out prospects that weren't drafted by them at their team facility. And that was a first and a second round pick. So my posed question, it was my question of the day, or I don't even know if it was my question of the day, but it was on that line, like, are they on the same level? And I'll ask you that, but majority of the replies, the reason I brought up Chicago is because the majority of the replies I got were people saying, no, but it's not worse than covering up sexual assault. Like, I know it's not, but you can't compare the two scenarios because it's like, and I gotta like I'm not defending obviously I'm not defending Chicago. I don't think that they should have gotten off scot-free because of that, but it's completely different scenarios to me. So do you think what happened to the Coyotes when John Chayka was fired for it, for working out prospects, getting fined a first and a second round pick, do you think it's on the same level if Dorion gave the wrong 10 teams?
If yet, like, I'm gonna say yes if Pierre did something on purpose. Like this, like it's hard to even prove, I guess, but like if Pierre was actually like purposely deceptive, then I do think the Sens should be punished. And again, like it sucks that the team has to be punished for the Pierre doing that, but like that's just the name of the game here. Like if the GM's deceptive or manipulative in a way that kind of violates the rules, of course the team's gonna get punished for it, which is why he'll probably be fired if that was the case. So yes, if Pierre like purposely handed them the wrong 10 teams and just tried to like screw something up to get his way, then absolutely the team should be punished. I just like I don't know why he would do that because you're obviously going to get caught doing that. So like I we don't it's like the Pinto thing. We don't know the details of what happened, so it's really hard to even say, what they should be punished because how are we supposed to when we don't know what actually happened behind the scenes? Um it's just so like it's a weird situation. It's a bizarre thing that you just don't hear about. If Pierre was manipulative or deceiving like that, that's kind of my thing. Then I do think he should be punished. If not, if there was some sort of mistake where again it was public info that he had a 10 team no trade list, so like it's like Anaheim has to be or Vegas has to be somewhat like knowledgeable here and do their own research, right? Like I know maybe that's not up to them to do. Maybe that's supposed to be kind of told by Pierre, but like at some point they have to be able to be accountable for their own research as well. What did you have there?
Well, that's the thing. So I think that's why it's important. Is it that they didn't know he had a 10 team or is it the wrong 10 teams? Because publicly you can see he has a 10 team, but we can't see who the teams are. No one knows that. That's never
See,
publicly available.
so if they gave them the wrong 10 teams, then that's absolutely punishable. Like that's bad. I mean, you
So
shouldn't be
that's what I'm
doing
saying.
that.
So I guess my
Yeah.
question is like it's going to be tough because if it's a mistake and when they investigate, I'm sure like it'll be a on the oath kind of thing, like in court it would be Dorion saying I legit just gave him the wrong 10 teams, or like you said if it's him admitting that he lied to them straight up to try and get rid of Dadonov, then that's bad too. But my question is like, if it's a mistake and a genuine mistake, is it still worth a first rounder? Like, probably yes. But do you think if it's a mistake, like, sorry, let me word this differently. If you're Steve Stais and you come in and this is the scenario you've got, you weren't here when this happened, but it's being, you're facing the repercussions now. If Dorian said, I just made a mistake, are you treating it any differently than if he lied? Like, I think he's fired either way. Because if you say it's a mistake, that's an inexcusable mistake to make because you signed the deal and it's going to cost you now. But if you lied, you're also just breaking the rules straight up. So to me, like, there's no difference. But I think it would paint Dorian in a much different light. Like I personally, I think mistake tracks. Like that seems like more of a thing that would be true than him just straight up lying to the Golden Knights and Kelly McCrimmon and saying, "Oh no, you know what? Anaheim, he doesn't want to go to these places when actually it's the other ones."
Yeah, I mean, like if he was lying, then yeah, like that looks really bad on him. But if it was a mistake, I mean, it still looks bad on him. Like Pierre, the thing with Pierre is he's made a handful of mistakes in his tenure as GM. Like he's not a mistake free guy. and I think he's still the seventh longest tenured GM in the league, along with DJ Smith, the head coach. And like, I just I think that the whole like Martian's rumor about Pierre being fired, I think it correlates to this in the sense that like if Ottawa's going to get punished here, I mean Steve Staios just came in and he talked about being best in class and that he wants the entire organization to be best in class. And now like what, a month later after he got hired, like and ownership took over, your GM is getting in trouble for either like a basically what I'll call like a bush league mistake or a blatant lie, and that either way it looks just as bad in my opinion. So I don't know how you don't make changes, frankly. And we're going to talk about the team on the ice a little bit more here coming up, but the team is not meeting expectations so far either. I know they just played well in Pittsburgh, but like they were 3-1, they're now 4-4. They lost 2 games to Atlantic Division opponents who they shouldn't have lost to. Detroit was hot, but like Buffalo was on a skid. They ended that skid against Ottawa on the second half of a back to back. Like there's just the team on the ice is not performing to expectations so far. The team off the ice is not performing to expectations so far. You've got this Pinto thing doesn't really fall on the team. Maybe you can say even that Pierre was taking a lot of the heat for Pinto right before this whole thing came out that he hadn't got him signed. It was kind of his own issue. I still think that that issue is true. Like he still put them in that salary cap situation. Again, they didn't know about this Pinto thing until the season was underway. So like they were still in that situation regardless of Pinto being suspended. Like they still had no space to sign him originally. Um, so that still looks pretty bad on Pierre. And then this thing comes out too. It's almost like somebody's trying to say, like, listen, I think it's time here for Pierre, Pierre to kind of get cut off from the Sens because I mean this is just like thing after thing coming up and negativity. So I think on the ice it provides a reason to kind of make changes in itself, and then you look at off the ice and it just all comes together. And it's like I mean, you've got a few days off here. Like, how do you not take action? Like, it just seems like this is the time to do it because we preach being best in class, but then we look like a bush league team with all this news coming out. Like, the Sens should not be the mockery of the NHL in 2023. It just shouldn't happen. It really does suck to see as fans. I mean, we've dealt with this for like 7 years now, and then this bush league stuff comes up years later, and it's like, come on, like at some point, this organization has to take a step, out of the bottom of the kind of basement and the cellar of the league and into that best in class and kind of work towards that because so far we aren't seeing it. So I do think that action needs to be taken. So I'll ask you that, and then we can kind of move into the on ice stuff a little more. Is do you think that like Pierre should be fired here, especially once the Dadonov news comes out? Because I do like I'm kind of feeling like it might correlate to something happening and an announcement being made.
If this has to be the final straw, then yeah. But like the writing's been on the wall. We talked about Steos and the history with Andlauer, how he came into Hamilton, was president for a year, then took over as GM as well. I still don't know if he fired whoever was in GM or they left, but that's what happened. The timeline's very similar here. Andlauer gets ownership of the team. Steos comes in as president. We'll see what happens in the next 12 months. But results alone should mean Pierre Dorion should be fired. Staffing decisions alone should mean he's fired. The 2021 draft alone means he should be fired. One of my questions of the day this weekend, and I liked it because it was, I was doing my best to be generous. I really was to give it a fair timeline, a fair, area of judgment. I asked if Pierre Dorion's work, what was his worst move after the 2020 draft? I counted. I went through the next day and counted. There were at least 10 different responses that were all valid reasons. That's ridiculous. In 3 years to have 10 different worst moves, um, and in the context of them against each other is just outrageous to me. Like there's so many things, Brendan, that I could go on and on about, and I know you feel the same. I like what the core, like I like the core that he's assembled. The draft picks that they've hit on have been home runs, and they weren't home runs at the time. That's all okay, but when you're the general manager of a sports team for 8 years, a professional sports franchise in a market and in a country that claims to be hockey crazy, you cannot justify missing the playoffs in 7 of your 8 seasons. I don't care what the team tells us. I don't care about old owners, new ownership. I don't care about that. It's pathetic that we haven't made the playoffs in 6 seasons and it's the same GM. And no matter who wants to defend Dorion, I used to be there too, to be honest. I liked him in 2020. I was on board with what they were doing. They cannot lie and tell us that the plan was to not have made the playoffs by this point. COVID aside, all of that. Like, it's ridiculous to me that it's still the case. And because of the way the ownership thing was unfolding over the last 12 months, it's why he wasn't here. Or he was here. Half of the summer of Pierre last year, which again, I was on that hype train. He made some great moves. The trade for DeBrincat originally was great. The signing of Claude Giroux, the Chikrin trade at the deadline last year, all fantastic moves. The problem was half of the summer of Pierre was him cleaning up his old mistakes. So my point is, how often do general managers of professional sports teams have the chance to fix that many mistakes in the first place? Never. It never happens. So that's why I'm like, when we started this podcast, we were saying we're going to hold this team to a standard now moving forward. And I know that other people have felt the same way. And that's probably why it seems like people are overreacting to a 4-4 start or a 3-3 start, 3 losses in a row before we even hit November. But it was about holding them to a higher standard because for years now, the last 3 seasons have been like just completely mediocre to me. So that's what's frustrating is that we've been spoon-fed these narratives, all the like this whole rebuild, like they're young, they're building, like they're doing all this. Thomas Chabot's 26 years old. He's turning 27 in January. These guys aren't young anymore. It's time to win. So when Pierre Dorion's going up to Michael Andlauer saying, "What do you want to do with our head coach DJ Smith?" and Andlauer saying, "It's your call, bud," and Andlauer saying that on public radio, to me, the writing's on the wall. I think it's a matter of time before he's gone. He's gone before DJ, in my opinion. And I'm just fed up. I'm fed up with mediocre hockey in this city. It's been 7 years since, or 8 years, he's made the playoffs once in 7 years, and it wasn't even his hockey team. That's my rant about Pierre Dorion.
Yeah, yeah, you've been getting the rants about Pierre for some time now, and I mean it's deserved. Like I'm with you there. I mean it's so hard to not be negative at this point. Like I'm again, I'm very happy that they won on Saturday because if they lost, I mean this would be a disaster. Like this would just be chaotic. So at least they did win there. But yeah, it's extremely hard to be positive at times because the Sens are playing poorly on the ice, their core's not performing, and then, Pierre Dorion's off the ice getting into, getting punished for things that happened because of him and his decisions years ago. So it's like it just seems like last week especially, it really did start pouring around this organization. And I just feel like we're not even in November yet. It should not be pouring. Like it shouldn't even be raining around the organization just because like November was the month last year that really screwed the Sens. At least they got off to a really nice start. This year it's like right off the hop. They couldn't even get that going and it started to pour. So yeah, we can kind of leave Pierre at that, I guess, just because I think he's taken the the brunt of the criticism from Jack today, and he's gonna listen to this and feel bad about himself. So
Yeah,
we can
sorry, Pierre. Sorry,
yeah.
bud.
But yeah, we can move on to some on ice stuff here because we're going long. Like this is we got a lot to hit on and it's good discussion. So we'll hit on. I'm gonna pull up your question of the day because I want to get into this one a little bit. You mentioned him, and that is. And by the way, if you haven't checked Twitter and Instagram a lot of the time too, Jackson posting these questions of the day like every single day. And yeah, it gets a lot of engagement. A lot of people like it gets people talking, kind of thinking, especially on these off days too. Kind of brings up some things that maybe people aren't thinking about. So today, the question of the day is does Thomas Chabot get too much hate? Now that's a good one because Chabot, we should report, is out 4 to 6 weeks with a fractured wrist. He blocked a shot against New York on Thursday. Um, I didn't even see it happen live. Like I was surprised when it came out the next day that he got hurt because did he stayed in the game, didn't he? I think it was in the second period, and he kept playing. And he said he couldn't like fully grip his stick, but like the initial report on the ice like during the game was that it was fine, so he kept playing. And then the next day they came out and said he's got a fractured wrist. Um, Big blow to the Sens because we were hyping up their top four and their defense overall this whole summer. And again, the one thing we always said was, listen, this is set up on paper to be one of the best defenses in hockey, but they have to stay healthy. Now, Chikrin was the big one. He's been hurt a lot in his career. Chabot's had some injuries, but he's been relatively healthy. It was just about staying healthy. Now, Artem Zub went out right away. Like what was that? Washington. So that was the third game I want to say of the year. He's been out since then. So the top four was already screwed up because of that. They called up Bernard Docker. Listen, from Zub to Bernard Docker, that's a big difference. Zub is a very critical member of this team. So we got a solid 2 full games of the new top four in the defense, and then injuries struck. So that was awesome to see. But Chabot now goes out. So we're gonna get into another player who went out, but I want to start with this question. So does Thomas Chabot get too much hate? I think we're gonna see over the next month here kind of what this team can do without him and how important he is. That's the one nice thing about him missing is if this team goes off the rails, I think we're gonna learn Chabot's a very very important player and that we should probably stop giving him so much criticism because I think we both have been fairly critical of him. But I want to hear your take because I know you've been a little higher on him than me. Especially this season, he was just kind of starting to find his groove right before he got hurt.
Yeah, so the wording of it is important, and I know that it's been a good question because it's pretty 50-50 in the results. So the reason the wording's important is because it's not saying, is he bad? It's not saying, is he, you know, good, or is he better than people say he is? It's just, does he get too much hate? Because I saw a lot of it going around. Like when he got hurt, it was a lot of, oh, people who hate Shabbat are gonna realize like what his value is and all of this. Um, and to me, I'm on the side of he doesn't get too much hate, but like, I think the criticism's been warranted, to be fair. And look, this is a guy who's paid like a top end defenseman, not super, super top end, but he is. And he's an offensive defenseman. So I'm not personally, I don't look at the way he plays defensively and say he's got to be better. There are times, yes, where there's a highlight and you're left kind of like, what is this guy doing? But that's normal. I could say that about any player on the Sens. That happens just to everyone. It's hockey. The problem with Shabbat, though, is the offensive stuff to me. And when the power play starts to fall off for him and he doesn't look as sharp on it, I know he drives play offensively at 5-on-5. To be honest, in the last few games before he got hurt, I thought it was the best he'd played in a few seasons. He looked really good starting in the game against Washington. And actually in their losses in against Detroit and Buffalo, he looked better. Like he wasn't the problem I had with the team on those nights. But the issue that I have, so again, I don't think he gets too much hate. I think it's warranted given that he's the highest paid defenseman right now until next season. He's the highest paid blue liner on the team. He plays the most. And I know people want to say he gets played too much, and that's a big concern with us. The more, weapons they have, they got to use them more. That's true. But top end defensemen play that many minutes. It's not uncommon. Like they're supposed to be able to do it. So if we're constantly saying, oh, we got to manage Shabbat's minutes, we got to make sure he's down closer to 20, then he's overpaid. And that's, I think, the balance of it, right? So I'm not saying that the Sens and DJ and Jack Capuano are throwing out Chabot because of his salary. They're doing it because he is a top end defenseman who can play like that. But if we're sitting here going, we got to play him less, then that's an indictment as well on Thomas Chabot because we've seen him do it before. Other guys on the team can do it if they need to. Chikrin and Sanderson played close to 30 minutes on Saturday. So to me, that's what the problem is. So I don't think it's too much hate. But I will say again, before he got hurt, he was playing very well. So it's tough. Like he had that great pass to Tarasenko. I know it was late in the Sabres game, but set up Tarasenko for a nice one. Had a great feed to Giroux against Washington. Like he was back. It felt like doing his stuff offensively. So again, like to me, defensively, if you're this, and we've said this before, if you're desiring better defensive play from Thomas Chabot, then you're going to end up disappointed. To me, it's the offensive side. When that's lacking a little bit, I don't think he gets too much hate at all. I think it's warranted. And that to me speaks to us holding them to a higher standard now. The moral victories are out the window for me. And I know you mentioned that in the middle of that losing streak there, but like that's where I stand. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I don't think he gets too much hate. No.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you. I don't think he does either. I will say that people who are saying that we should immediately trade him and get rid of him and stuff, that's a little excessive. But again, that's not the majority. That's just a few people here and there. I agree with you that he doesn't get too much hate because pretty much the same reasons. I mean, to me, like I really like that pass to Tarasenko. That kind of showed his vision and him actually reading the ice. I want to see more of it though. Like that's the thing for me is he can do that like once in a blue moon, but like I want to see that every game. Like I want to see that dynamic presence. I will say I did think he was better too over the last few games before he got hurt. But again, like looking at his whole season, I mean, production, 3 assists in 7 games, no goals. And then you look at like Sanderson and Chikrin, who are like a point per game each with 3 goals and 4 goals, respectively, and at the top of the league among defensemen. And then Shabbat's like averaging more minutes than them and getting more opportunity. And it's like he's still not really finding the groove. It's just you need him to, and again, points are one thing, but you need him to be that dynamic force. I still think he's made a lot of mental errors, and he's going to do that again. He's kind of like the same way with Carlson, where he's the offensive guy who's not great defensively. But like I've had a lot of clips of him just kind of not engaging in front of the net. Like I mean, defensively things are going to happen, but I still think if you're using him as like a 26-minute a night player, he needs to be able to hold his own. And he just like he can't be a liability in the D zone, which I almost feel like he has been. And again, if he is being a liability in the D zone, he needs to be producing like Chikrin is up front, where he's got 4 goals and 4 assists. and he's like a first power play guy, and he just hasn't like he got demoted from the first unit. Maybe we can say Sanderson got promoted and Chabot didn't get demoted, but like it wasn't working with Chabot there, and he didn't look good. He looked too slow on it, and he just wasn't able to get shots through. And it's just Sanderson looks better. And again, I think we said this before. I don't know if it was before the season, but now that we have two really good defensemen with Chikrin and Sanderson, and then you have Chabot, like Chabot's not the guy anymore. He's not the only one. There's actually a comparison happening in our minds, whether we even notice it or not. Like when Sanderson and Chikrin look really good, like they have, and then Chabot looks even mediocre, it makes Chabot look really, really bad. And it makes us really low on him because we're so like high on Sanderson and Chikrin. It's like Chabot needs to be performing at that level too. I do still not love his utilization because he's still leading the Sens in average ice time, which that's fine. I understand that the coaching staff seems to think that he's like a definite number one defenseman. I'm not even arguing that. I think he can be. But at the same time, when Sanderson and Chikrin are playing so well, I think they need to kind of adjust those minutes. Chabot, I don't think should be leading the Sens in ice time every single night anymore, especially when it's by 2, 3, 4 minutes. And Sanderson's on the first power play. Like it just doesn't. I'm not a big fan of that. But again, I still think Chabot looked better. But I will say that yes, he does not get too much hate because he hasn't been the guy that they signed for $8 million. Like Chabot has not been the guy that they signed for like a couple of years now. I mean, if you remember back when he was the only real star defenseman on this team, like he would make plays where he'd go end to end. I remember that goal against Toronto and Tampa Bay where he went end to end and he like came in on the backhand, pulled it forehand, and then went top shelf. And like we just haven't seen that for a while now. We haven't seen that guy who's able to really make things happen like that. Like Chabot so far and in the last year or two, he just kind of looks like he's someone who's out there skating around a lot and averaging a lot of minutes. And that's why I do think it's going to be hard for the Sens to replace him, is that now other players are going to have to play more minutes and kind of their responsibilities are going to get harder. But he kind of like Chabot, he's not really making a whole lot happen offensively and he's costing them defensively. So he hasn't been good enough as a whole. And so like the way he's playing right now, I don't think he's worth $8 million personally. I think I'd pay him 5 or 6, but like 8 million is a guy who's dynamic, who's able to do those end-to-end rushes, who's responsible enough defensively that they're not costing you when you're out there. Like I don't want to hold my breath when Chabot's on the ice, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I think we are going to find out over the next month how important he is to the team, because if the Sens really struggle, especially defensively, and their defense does look pretty rough on paper, but again, that's because Zub is also out, and then we're going to talk about Eric Branstrom. But like if they really struggle, then yeah, Chabot's importance is going to go way up, and people are going to be pretty high on him because like it's not easy to replace 25 minutes a night. It's really not, no matter which way you spin it. But at the same time, if Ottawa has a pretty decent November month and Chabot is out, then it's going to be interesting to see how the narrative shifts. And I'm going to kind of keep an eye on that. I'm not going to like push like, oh, they're better without Chabot. I don't believe that at all, not for a second, even if they play well. But I do think that the narrative is going to shift for fans if they do play a good November month and look like they did against Pittsburgh with Chabot out of the lineup, because like, I mean, that's just natural. Like if a player is missing and the team seems to play better without them, that's going to be a really interesting debate. But again, it's going to be curious and kind of interesting over the next month to see how they perform.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh game is it's tough that that was the first one he missed, because on paper right away you're like, oh, they were fine. They don't need him. 5 goals, only 2 against. They were great. Um, but that first period was a gong show, and Jonas Corposalo saved their bacon, and Tristan Jari decided to not show up, so it helped them. So it's almost, and obviously the bounce back was good from the team, but I don't want to say that. I want to see more, and we will obviously, because he's out for at least a month. So that kind of it for Chabot and everything. Just want to hit on Branstrom. Do you want to just, because I wasn't actually watching the game when the Branstrom collision happened, so you want to just go through what kind of happened, and then just we'll talk about what his absence means and what we need to, what we hope he's, like, obviously hope he's okay, but just what was the vibe like on the broadcast and in the rink and everything? I wasn't really watching.
Yeah, so that was in New York. It was the same game as Shabbat. So of course, Cal Clutterbuck of all people comes in, and Branstrom came down the offensive wall, and he was going towards the corner, and then Clutterbuck he kind of just fired the puck around the net, and Clutterbuck gave him, I don't want to say a late hit because it wasn't dirty. It was essentially the hit that Ridley Gregg put on DeBrincat. It was pretty much the exact same hit, actually, where he came in from the side and kind of got his hand into him and like pushed him upwards into the board. So he lifted him off the ice. And Branstrom, being small as he is, he often gets hit pretty hard. And Clutterbuck's obviously an enforcer, so he comes in and he kind of lifted him off the ice. And then Branstrom, it was just the way he fell. It was the big thing. It wasn't the hit. It was the way he fell. You could see it on the video. He nails his head off the ice. Yes, they're wearing a helmet, but if you've ever hit your head off the ice, like that'll ring your skull. Like it moves your brain around. So he's concussed, and Branstrom stayed down. He actually had to be stretchered off the ice. both teams came out and kind of like it took a good 10 minutes to get him off, and he was actually like it was scary because he was actually like seizing up a little bit, like he was kind of getting the convulsions where your body moves and stuff on the broadcast, which was not something you like to see at all. It kind of gives you the chills. Clutterbuck actually came out and said after that he felt sick to his stomach about what happened, and that kind of threw the whole game off too. So um, it was not a fun video to watch, but Branstrom seems to be doing better. I mean, he went to the hospital and then he flew home the next day. He's concussed. We don't know how long he's going to be out. I mean, it didn't look good. I'd guess like somewhere between like I don't even know, like 2 to 5 weeks. Like it's going to be somewhere in the same range as Chabot potentially, or if he's really lucky and kind of heals faster, it could be sooner. So who knows about the timeline? You might have a better idea. I was never
Well,
actually
it's
concussed, so
it's tough with concussions, like, you never know. It's
yeah, yeah,
literally day to day, but it could be day to day for a year or for a
yeah.
month. Like, it's up in the air, but, I think I wanted to save this for last because obviously we want Brandstrom to be okay, but with the, Adam Johnson, like, tragic incident that happened over the weekend in the EIHL, just felt like it's never fun seeing a player down like that, stretchered off. So obviously I saw the play. It didn't look malicious. It wasn't a freak accident, like you said, just the way he landed. But obviously this happened before the Adam Johnson thing. But I think it's been a bit of a whirlwind weekend in the hockey world, and I think that Adam Johnson stuff was just really brutal. Obviously, he passed away after being cut by a skate on his neck. It was brutal. So um, it's good that Branstrom is okay. I think the updates from the Sens throughout the night were really positive, obviously. Excuse me. And it sounds like he's all right. So I can't speak right now. Lost my voice clearly this weekend in London. So Brendan, why don't you wrap it up again for us here? Just that's been a jam-packed episode for us.
It has, yeah, and one final thing on Branstrom too is just that when you look at the defense again, it is they were missing Chabot, Branstrom, and Zub against Pittsburgh, and they managed to win, which is kind of crazy. But again, that was Jonas Corp-Salo primarily. He made just a ridiculous game, 40 saves. But yeah, they're back in action on Thursday against LA. We can take a quick look at their schedule too, because I tweeted that out yesterday or the day before. So their next 5 games, when you go ahead and look at it, you've got LA, and then you've got Tampa Bay. Yeah, so those 2 games are at home. So LA, Tampa Bay at home, then you go to Toronto, you got Ottawa versus Toronto, Battle of Ontario, then you're back home against Vancouver and, Calgary, and then they go to Sweden. So those to me are 5 like LA and Tampa are difficult teams, Toronto's a difficult team, Vancouver's had a hot start. I mean, they're not gonna be easy games, but at the same time, Ottawa's had 4 full days off here, and they're gonna get 4 full days off before facing LA, so they're gonna be fresh, and then they get, 4 of the next 5 games at home as well before going to Sweden, which is like if you wanted the chance to improve your record from 4-4 to maybe, get up to 7-4, 7-5, like get into that vicinity where you're starting to climb in the standings, this is it, right? Like you get several days off and then you get 4 of your next 5 games at home. Like take advantage here because yeah, they're good teams, but at the same time, you have the advantage. Like you have the entire advantage here with rest, with the home, like everything. So um we're gonna be back here. I don't know when. We can find a time, but they obviously play Thursday night next. And yeah, and then we've got a few games in a row. So again, thanks everybody for supporting us. And of course, we missed a few days, but we got everything kind of hit on today and recapped and got into a lot of discussions. Jack got his classic Pierre Dorion rant off, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, but maybe we'll hear something about Pierre in the next few days as this Dadonov thing kind of spells out for us because we're expecting that. So keep an eye on updates for that. And otherwise, I'll tweet out our next kind of planned recording time. Maybe we'll do a pregame or something. We'll see. But yeah, thanks everybody for the support. This has been episode 52 of the Everyday Sense podcast, and we're gonna striving for the 2,000 subscribers by what was our goal? The end of the season. That's our goal.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, end of
Just
the season.
being generous, but we can get there before
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, we'll get a spike. So yeah, so that's our goal. So thanks everybody for the support. Go subscribe to everydaysens.com if you haven't already, just to get more analysis. I'm gonna keep working on the film studies and stuff. They take a lot of time, but keep looking on our YouTube for that and our social media for updates. Otherwise, go Sens go, and we'll see you on Thursday to enjoy the game against Los Angeles.